Okay, smashing. I think we'll get started. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining our Ten2Two webinar. Today, we will be focusing on employing people flexibly, best practice. As experts in flexible and part-time recruitment and consulting, we have a wealth of experience in this area, and we'd like to share some of this with you today. I'm Jane O'Gorman, Director of Ten2Two, and your co-host for today. And I'll be keeping an eye out for any questions that you may have over the course of the session. Now, you can pop these in the Q&A below. We will also follow up with a link to the webinar and a recap on questions, so no need to be writing too much down at the moment. Now, we only have 30 minutes for our webinar today, plus added time for questions. So without further ado, I would like to hand you over to my very lovely colleague, Jo Gregory, who'll be leading the presentation today. Over to you, Jo.
Thanks, Jane, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for giving us your time. We know how precious it is. As Jane said, we are experts in flexible working and have been in this space for over 18 years now. So in that time, we've seen lots of practice, the best and some of the worst. And the content of today isn't just through our own experience, but it actually comes from a document we put together with input from a range of clients and partners of ours and their lived experience of flexible working of all different types. So I'll be making reference to some of the comments from them, some of the quotes that we've taken from that document, and we will be able to share that document with you as part of our follow-up as well. These sessions aren't just an opportunity for us to talk at you, although we are just talking at you for a little while. They are a chance for you to sit back and have a think about your own experience. They're meant to provoke thought, they're meant to provoke consideration, and a chance for you to reflect on what's going well, maybe what's going not quite so well, and get some input from other organisations, including ourselves, as to what you might be able to do to enhance your flexible working practices. So I have to remember to change the slides, otherwise you'll just be looking at this same one the whole time. Bear with me, why is that not working? There we go. So we've got quite a lot of content to get through today. The slides look quite busy. I won't just talk through them, but I will talk at you quite a lot. If you've got any questions or queries, as Jane said, she's on hand to type away responses. So please pop them in the Q&A. We will try and come back to you. If we run out of time, we will follow up with you directly. And we will be sharing Jane and my contact details. So if anybody wants to follow up and have a more in-depth conversation around any of this, then we're more than happy to do that. So we're going to start off with a bit of context around the recruitment and retention challenges that many of us are facing at the moment. This is a general concern that a lot of businesses have, not just businesses who recruit flexibly. Everybody is having issues around recruitment and retention at the moment. So we'll touch on that. We'll then go into flexible working specifically and talk about recruiting and onboarding. We'll then move on to managing people who work flexibly. And then managing teams. We'll then try and summarise everything for you nicely, put a little bow on it. And if we've got time, we will go through some questions. So hopefully we'll power through. I do like to chat, so I warn you, may get a bit content heavy. Everybody's bored of hearing the post-lockdown phrase, because it is 5 years ago now. I'm sure most of you will agree that since the pandemic, there has been a huge change in flexibility and an uplift in the amount of flexibility that there is, and the assumption that flexibility is going to be part of everybody's working life. And we're not naive in thinking that that's been easy for everybody. There are challenges. So we're going to talk about some of those challenges and give some suggestions as to how to overcome them throughout today's content. And you might have to remind me if I just sit on the same slide. I have to move it along. So the document I made reference to earlier, these are just some of the brands who we worked in conjunction with to put together the briefing document. They have all embraced flexibility to one degree or another. And there are many, many more who contributed to our research and who we work with ongoing. So this is just to give you an idea of the amount of input that's come into today's session, and the fact that it's not just from 10-2. So we're going to start looking at the context at the moment, I guess. Now, recruitment and retention has always been important, but I think in an uncertain economic climate, it's almost the most important thing that we can focus on at the moment. Oxford Economics have tried to put a figure on what recruitment can cost. So not just a recruitment fee or an advertising fee, but thinking about the investment in time, the training, so on and so forth. And they've said that it can be over £30,000, which for any business, large or small, is a large amount of money. And we want to make sure that we are getting some value out of that and we're not wasting that money. So thinking about planning your role, planning your recruitment campaign, planning your onboarding is really, really important. As you can see here, some of the stats from TimeWise, Total and Gallup state that 9 out of 10 people want more flexible working. 66% of employees would overlook a pay rise to receive their desired benefit, which is flexible working. So these are just a couple of things to take into consideration when considering flexibility, that it is highly, highly desired at the moment. And then thinking more about the retention side of things, employee engagement is relatively stagnant at the moment. And the level of stress within the workplace is seemingly quite high. Both of these things can contribute to poor retention. So we need to be aware of these statistics. We need to be aware of these trends and do what we can to make sure that they're not impacting our teams. So this is a really lovely quote that we had as part of our research from Fiona from RDT. And it talks about how flexibility has changed. It is no longer a women's issue. It's no longer just to do with childcare. You know, flexibility is now desired by pretty much everybody. And we at 10-2 have seen this, especially over the last few years. We've got a growing candidate base with people looking for flexibility for all different sorts of reasons. Caring responsibilities are still up there in terms of being the most prevalent reason that people want flexibility, but it's not always childcare. There's a growing number of people who might have elder care responsibilities, their partners, their parents, all different sorts of caring responsibilities. And then there's people who are more interested in lifestyle reasons. So they might have a strong dedication to volunteering. That means that flexible working would allow them to do more of that. They might have a side hustle. Still not sure how much I like that phrase, but you know, they might be looking at fractional working or having a portfolio career. People are coming to us and looking for flexibility for so many different reasons now. And as we said to start off with, this quote encapsulates it perfectly, that it's no longer just about women. It really is everybody. So you need to take that into consideration across your business, and not make any assumptions about people wanting or not wanting flexibility. So incorporating flexibility into a role, we get that can be a bit daunting. You know, if you've always had a relatively standard Monday to Friday in the office, 9 to 5, it can be a bit scary thinking, how do I approach flexibility? How do I look at this? So we would say that a great place to start is when you're originally thinking about the role. So maybe you've had somebody leave and you need to refill that position, or maybe your business is growing and you need an additional head. Take the time to really consider the flexibility that could be applied to that position. Now, we get that the focus needs to be on the delivery of that role. We need that role to perform for the business. We understand that that has to be the primary concern. And I think that the third quote on the left of the screen there, focus on the skills, experience and values of the role individual. The desire to work from home is a secondary detail, encapsulates that brilliantly. You have to think about the core role first, and then the flexibility can kind of come alongside that. But do take that into consideration when you're designing the role. Do think about the different ways that the role could be worked flexibly. Does it absolutely have to be 37.5 hours a week? There was a great online chat last week about where did 37.5 hours a week even come from? You know, how has it been decided that that is the number of hours that every job takes? So, you know, think critically about the role, ask questions, dig deep, allow it some time. Then think about the types of flexibility that the candidates you are interested in and want to engage might be looking for at the moment. You know, if you're looking for somebody at a management level, try and think about who that target audience might be and the sort of flexibility that they might want. And that might guide your thinking around the flexibility that you could apply to the role. And then thirdly, ensure flexibility has balance for the employee, the business and the team. You do have to remember that this role doesn't operate in a complete silo. This role needs to be able to integrate with the rest of your team. It needs to be able to achieve the business objectives. So although it would be lovely to say, yes, this role can be entirely remote and it can work 2 hours a day across 4 days, that might not work with the rest of your team, and that might not give it enough working hours to achieve the objectives against the role. So be realistic about what's going to work for the business and what's going to work for the rest of your team as well. Maybe bring the team into helping design that role. Depends on the level of transparency in your business and the individuals in your business. But other employees might have great ideas about how a role could be more flexible or how the business could integrate flexibility. Just referring to my notes.
I could interject there, Jo, while you're checking.
Sure.
The other thing, just in terms of when you mentioned that, in terms of designing the role, and sometimes it can be on redesigning the role, because very often in terms of how to introduce flexibility, it may be that there are elements of that role that are no longer required, or that could actually be possibly shared through other responsibilities in the organization, and that can help perhaps bring in the right talent and the right caliber and bring in that element of flexibility into the organization at the same time.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the rate at which technology is changing also has an impact on every single role. And again, we're not going to start saying that roles are going to be taken over by technology, but incorporating good technology into your business can potentially allow for greater flexibility, and also might mean that you're looking for a slightly different skill set. So don't ever just assume that a role is like for like if you're refilling a role. Give it the time. Okay, interviewing and selecting for flexibility. Now, obviously, this is where Ten2Two come into their own in terms of the stories that we could tell and the experiences that we've had and seen. And the interview process has changed over the last little while. There's no getting away from that. Most businesses now will have some sort of remote interview, if not an entirely remote interviewing process. And that is different from how it used to be. And we need to take that into consideration and be realistic about the challenges that presents and the areas that we might be missing out on from the more traditional in-person face-to-face interview. So the first thing is just make sure that your setup is right. Make sure that whatever communication platform you're using, whatever remote connectivity you're using, make sure that it works, and make sure that the candidates that you're interviewing are comfortable with it and have the capability to connect. It's no good for them if they're panicking at the last minute that they can't connect to the link that you've sent, or that they need to download something. So just planning in advance and making sure that they have all that they need. Never make any assumptions, and just overload them with information, I would say, rather than anything else. The third point on the quotes on the left, I think, is really interesting. So discuss flexibility at interview. I'm sure that Jane has this experience all the time. I can't tell you how many candidates get really nervous about exploring flexibility within an interview situation. Now, most of the time when they come through an agency like Ten2Two or others, we will have been able to have those conversations with them directly. We will have been able to set the scene, to manage their expectations. However, not everybody that you're seeing is necessarily going to be through an agency or will have had the privilege of having those in advance conversations. And people can get really nervous about bringing it up in an interview. So be on the front foot with what flexibility is and isn't available, and be realistic and transparent. So making sure that you're being realistic and transparent, making sure that the tech's in place, making sure that you yourself know how to use the technology. I'm guilty of that. There are some platforms I find very tricky. And then thinking about what you might be missing from that previous in-person experience. So things like the walk from the lift to the office, where you ask the candidates some questions that might not be interview questions. You know, how far have you travelled to get here? Isn't the weather lovely today? Those sorts of really gentle introductions can really help put a candidate at ease. And they can sometimes be missed in an online interview. You know, you can connect and go straight into questioning, straight into the interview. So maybe build in a couple of minutes just to have a slightly more informal chat, just to start breaking the ice, to start getting people talking. Soft skills, these used to be, in the main, picked up through body language, through how people communicated between the lift and the office, through, you know, whether people were on the front foot to shake your hand. Those things obviously can't happen through a remote interview. So structuring some very purposeful questions around people's soft skills. And the ones that we think that you might want to focus on are really communication, teamwork, and personal organisation, especially if you're looking at a hybrid or remote employee. So communication isn't just about tapping somebody on the shoulder when you walk through the office anymore, or being able to drag somebody into a meeting. People need to understand how to communicate on a remote basis. So you might want to question what their thoughts are around, you know, how do they approach communicating with a remote team? What approaches, what skills have they found useful? Have they used any kind of communication tools? So we at Ten2Two use Teams. We're on it a lot. But you'd never know that we were all in different areas, because we have a lovely chit chat that takes us through the day. And it's more than just replacing the office banter. It gives us a way of making sure that we are all on top of everything, that we've got a way of communicating on a slightly less formal basis if we need help with something, if somebody needs to pick something up. So again, questioning their comfort with various tools to enhance communication. You never know, you might get some tips from them. They might have some interesting tools that you've not used before. Teamwork, again, this can sometimes be a struggle. It can sometimes be more difficult for remote teams. So structuring some questions around their approach to teamwork if they're going to be working either virtually or in a hybrid pattern. And personal organisation. Personal organisation really, really comes into its own when you're working in a team where people work part-time, where people work hybrid, where people work remote. Being able to organise yourself and your time, your projects, your team, your colleagues, all of these things are really highlighted in those situations. And we find that it's as much down to the individual as it is down to the employer, to put structure around the organisational skills needed, especially for part-time working. So putting in some questions around personal organisation, team organisation. And I should say at this point, if anybody needs help with structuring interview questions, then you can, of course, contact Jane or I, and we can give you some pointers. I'm sure that we've got some collateral that we can share with you. We've also got a really great guide for interviewing online. So again, if anybody's interested in that, please let us know and we can pop that across to you. So once you've gone through that lovely screening and selection phase, and we've done all the interviews, we know how much you all love that. I'm on the wrong page of my notes. I'm all over the place today. I do apologise. So we're on to onboarding. And as you know, onboarding is so important, whether it's full-time in the office, part-time, remote, whatever it is. Allowing that person to buy into the business as quickly as possible is absolutely vital. Firstly, to ensure that they're up and running and productive as quickly as possible. Secondly, to make sure that that 30 grand that we talked about earlier isn't just about to walk out of your office nice and quickly. And I'm sure that you had experience of this, and we at Ten2Two have seen that gone are the days where people will stick out a role because they feel they have to, or for fear of what it might look like on their CV. If an onboarding process isn't great and doesn't reflect the culture that you've sold in the interview process, people are more comfortable walking quickly from a role than they ever have been before. So it's really, really key to get it right. And it's not rocket science. Gone are the days where you can shove somebody in a corner with a stack of paper to read through for a couple of days. It needs to be more interactive than that. So you need to make sure that there is planning and structure put into your new joiners' first few days. So making sure that the tech is available. It sounds obvious, but it doesn't always happen. So making sure that they have their laptop, if they're remote, delivered to them a couple of days in advance. If they're going to be coming into the office, make sure it's there and that it's been signed into and that it's, got the right software on it ready for them to get going with. Make sure they've got an email address. You could pre-populate their inbox with dates for their diary, with some interesting company information to read through. Having that there would be really useful for them to dip into in the quieter times. Making sure that not just your time is scheduled out with them, but they've got one-to-ones with other members of the team, or possibly even external stakeholders who they're going to be very involved with. So pre-populating their diary with some one-to-ones, allowing them for some downtime as well, because this is a lot of information that you're throwing at them over the first couple of days. Now, obviously, if we're talking about somebody who's working remotely, this is all going to need to be done on a remote basis. So you might want to have something to put in their diary that is more face-to-face or in person in the future. Most people who work on a remote basis, most companies will still have the occasional in-person get-together, whether it's a team dinner or an away day. So if you've got something coming up, make sure they know about it in advance so that they can make the appropriate arrangements, make sure they've got it in their diary. And if you've got somebody who's working part-time, really take that into consideration when you're putting these meetings into their diary. It can be incredibly disconcerting and upsetting for people if they've agreed to a part-time contract and within their first week, there's a meeting in their diary. They finish at 3 and there's a meeting that's due to start at 4. How comfortable would you feel bringing that up with your line manager in a brand new role? So just, again, be mindful, put the time into planning it, involve your colleagues, involve the team, and make sure that you're not just thinking about the needs of the new person coming in, but you're thinking about the needs of the wider team as well. So make sure that everybody is booked in at a reasonable time, make sure that there's a good flow of information. I think assigning a mentor or buddy is a brilliant idea if you've got the capability within your team. So maybe somebody who works a similar pattern, maybe somebody within their team, maybe somebody in a completely different team who can just be a bit of a sounding board for them, or somebody who can take them out for lunch and just kind of go, right, you can breathe now, just a second, just breathe. But do what you can to put the pre-planning in place for that. And it sounds like a lot of work, but it's absolutely worth it. Okay. So we've got them in place. They're brought into the company. You've done your onboarding. They're up and raring to go, and they're starting to create value. But they're working flexibly, and you still need to be able to manage that person or those teams. I'll go on to teams in a minute. So there are some brilliant quotes here on the left-hand side, and they all ultimately come down to the same thing, which is communicate, communicate, communicate. We talk about this a lot at Ten2Two, and it's very easy to make assumptions that people know things. I would say with managing people, never make assumptions. You'd rather over communicate than under communicate, and that lead to a misinterpretation or a misunderstanding. So not only do you need to think about the timings of your communications, so making sure, as we said, that you're not putting things in people's diaries when they're not scheduled to be working, but you need to think about the medium through which you're communicating. You need to think about the needs of the individuals that you're communicating with, and you need to think about the effectiveness of that communication. So again, I know this feels like a lot, but once you're in the flow of things and once you've got a good good strategy behind your communication, it will just become very, very normal. So if you think about the good old days when we were all in the office and I don't know, Bob would walk through and somebody would go, oh, great job on that account, Bob. That was brilliant. Things like that can get lost in a remote working environment or a hybrid working environment, which can be even worse. You know, if those things are still happening in the physical office, but people who work remotely or on a hybrid basis are missing out on them because they're not physically there in the office. We need to think of ways that we can keep everybody involved, everybody motivated, everybody buoyed by the successes of the business. So taking that into consideration, can we have a team meeting at a time when everybody is available? And can we use that team meeting to highlight successes within the business? Do we need that meeting to be ultra formal and very, very rigid? Or can we have something slightly more informal? Do we need to, as well as having that team meeting, have individual meetings, and how often do they need to be? Do we need to make sure that we're not just relying on annual or every 6-month check-ins with people to go through their goals, to give them feedback? Do we need to be a bit more regular than that? Do we need to drip feed in meetings and feedback and check-ins? Obviously, all of your team are going to be different in terms of their personality and their needs as well. I mean, hands up, I am a needy employee. Jane will tell you, I need a pat on the head every 5 minutes. Otherwise, I don't know if I'm coming or going. But then there are going to be other people in the team who are a lot more happy to get on with it and don't necessarily need that level of interaction. So taking that into consideration as well, and just allocating the time and the effort for personal and professional development. Everybody wants to feel as though they're developing. Everybody wants to feel as though they're contributing to the business goals. So being able to involve people in open discussions. One of our founder, John, worked with a great business who had a pattern of every Friday. They would have a kind of tools down, unofficial cool down meeting. Now, last thing on a Friday might not be the best timing for a lot of the working patterns that we work with, but thinking about a time in the week where you can get everybody together, maybe not for a very formal structured meeting, maybe for something that is a bit of a replacement of those water cooler moments, maybe for something that is a bit of a replacement of bumping into somebody while you're making a quick coffee. If it's a bit too uncomfortable just to leave it loose, have a theme. You know, think about things that you might talk about. Maybe it's a Monday morning and you all have a bit of a chat about what you did over the weekend. Maybe it's the middle of the week and you have a kind of recap of where you've got to and what your plans for the rest of the week are. Whatever it is that you guys think is interesting. I think one of the ideas John came up with was what was a food that you'd never want to eat, or to something random, just to give it a theme, to give people something to talk about. But remember that when you've got people who are potentially working different patterns, when you've got people who are working in different locations, those water cooler moments that we took for granted, or those bumping into each other while you're, you know, finding your favorite milk in the fridge that we did take for granted, might not be there anymore. And that level of communication, that level of relationship building is really, really important. So try and think about ways that are going to work for your culture, that are going to work for your team, to reintegrate them. Okay. A lot of this is repeating what we've just said, because I did focus on teams rather than individuals. Apologies. And that top quote, which has been highlighted there: open communication, clear instruction, empathy, and kindness. Nothing there is different from how it has ever been. You know, the way that we manage our teams, flexible or not, we should have always been openly communicating. We should have always been giving clear instructions. We should always act with empathy and kindness. These things haven't changed, but we just need to be even more determined. I don't know if that's the word. We need to be more planned in the way that we're doing it. Jane's desperate to say something. I'm going to let her say something.
I was just going to say conscious.
Conscious.
Is that consciousness?
Absolutely.
Thank you for that.
So yes, thinking about ways that we can bring the team in, bring the team together. So facilitating informal interactions, as we just talked about. We at Ten2Two are a big fan of sharing numbers. So we have regular meetings where we share various different metrics that the business uses across the whole team. So everybody is understanding and bought into where the business is and what their contribution towards those numbers is. Therefore, they can go and plan their time really specifically and in a really driven and tailored way to keep working and to keep moving forward. That might not be your guys' culture. You might not want to be so open, but find ways that you can share information, allow people to buy in, and make them feel closer to the central core of the business, even if they're working hundreds of miles away in a different city. Highlighting team performance, as we said, we might not be able to high five people across the office anymore. Makes me shiver thinking about that, to be honest. But think about, virtual high fives. Maybe you have like a team email that goes out once a week to highlight some of the great achievements, or maybe in these informal meetings, you start the meeting just by saying, I'd like to bring to your attention a brilliant project that Jane was able to deliver last week in half the time it normally takes us. Jane's given me permission to share a few key points from that delivery. And just start with a really promising, positive message, because that not only highlights that individual, but it could highlight a whole team, and it shows everybody in the team that you've got a culture of really recognizing good performance and congratulating people. I think that's all that we need to cover on that side. Again, just making sure in all of this that there is a overarching consideration for people's working patterns, for people's external commitments, and for people's connectivity with the rest of the team. So again, if they're hybrid, if they're remote, if they're office-based, just trying to make sure that everybody is herded towards the same process in terms of communication, so that we're not having kind of pockets of different people communicating in different ways. And I'm not going to labour this point because we're not HR professionals, we are flexible working professionals, but everything that we've talked about, it's really, really important that this is all underpinned by policy and procedure, which is in line with your culture. So there are different businesses are going to take this in different ways. Some businesses are incredibly prescriptive and want everything completely documented and I's dotted and T's crossed. Other businesses are a little bit looser and they might have more informal agreements in place. The agreements part is what's really important, and making sure that everybody understands what the parameters are and understands where they should go and what they should do given certain circumstances. So the core things that you need to have in place are a flexible working policy. This is a legal requirement now. And again, we can offer guidance and advice or point you in the right direction. I think one of the pages in the document that we will send is from a great client of ours, Matron Solicitors, who we've worked with before, who provide a one-pager on flexible working policies and processes. Operating processes. So again, who, how, and when. So we've gone through a lot of that today. It's just about having clear outlines as to who people need to go to, how they need to get to them, and when they need to be in contact with them. Employment contracts, we get a lot of questions around this, around elements of flexibility in an employment contract. Does it need to be written into the contract? Can it be a more informal agreement and the contract more standardized? There are different ways of approaching this, and we would say that it needs to be transparent and clear. And if you do have something informal that sits outside of the core of your employment contract, that does need to be documented somewhere so that there is an understanding between the employer and the employee of what has been agreed. And then flexible working requests, again, linked to the flexible working policy, just making sure that you are following procedure correctly and being fair and open-minded with any flexible working requests that come in. And again, it needs to be in line with your culture. So Virgin Money is a great example of a very open and flexible approach to policies, procedures, so on and so forth. Whereas a company like an investment bank, for example, might have slightly more rigidity, but it sits alongside their culture. And just to summarise, I've no idea how we're doing on time, so we might have ages left or no time at all. Just to summarise,
couple of minutes.
As we said before, flexible working in all its forms, it doesn't detract from the core fact that we still need to do all of the things that we've always needed to do. So communicate, apply kindness, apply understanding. We do have to manage the people and not just the work. And on that side of things, nothing has changed. There just needs to be an added layer of consideration for the different elements of flexibility that you might bring into the business and the impact that that will have on people and teams. And a great quote here from Nicola from CPS saying, lead, don't manage, share the highs, learn from the lows, listen and praise. And I think on that note, we'll stop talking.
Yep. Great line to finish on, Jo. To be honest, there's so much content. That's brilliant. We are a little bit tight on time, so I don't think we have time to go through questions now, but the couple we have, we can obviously follow up on those when we send the other information from today. But I think for now, unfortunately, that is all we have time for. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you, Jo, for a great presentation. As I say, a lot of content and a lot of food for thought. So we do hope that you found it useful. As I mentioned, we will follow up with a link to the webinar, which you can watch at your leisure. And please do allow just a couple of days for that to come through, and we'll take a peek at those questions too. There will also be a brief summary to gather your feedback. We are always very grateful for any input, so please do let us know your thoughts. And Jo mentioned at the intro, and there will be links to our video calendars. So if there is anything from today or anything in general around flexible working, anything we can support with, please do not hesitate to block some time with us, and we're always very happy to have a chat. But that's it for now, and we do hope to see you on another 10 to 2 webinar soon. Have a lovely day. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.